And with that, we are at the question. That was a quick one.
So, very quickly, is there anyone who has a question that they would like another card to fill out right now? We can hand those out. Just raise your hand if you need another question card. We're not going to pause for the 5 minutes. We're just going to dive into the questions just for the sake of time, and we want to make sure that we get all of the frequently asked questions, all of the big hot topic questions answered for everyone, and then perhaps, depending on how long that goes, still have maybe 10 minutes of individual time. So raise your hand if you've got a card you need picked up. Raise your hand if you want another card, and I think Jonathan and Amy will just take off from here.
Yeah, and while if there are more cards while we're picking them up, we'll go ahead and start answering them. So obviously we have more questions. Some of them are very particular to certain cases, so we're not going to be able to answer. We're not going to be able to answer all of these of tonight in the group setting. If you still feel like your question hasn't been answered and you want to discuss further, as Justin said, the consultant and staff will be up here afterward. But we'll try to get through as many of these as we can. So with that, I'll start with kind of a process-driven one. A few questions were asked about who will ultimately make the decision, they specifically mentioned if six-story buildings are to be allowed, how many people are on the committee, are they elected, have they taken into consideration the amount of opposition there is to the proposal. So the ultimate decision, as we mentioned through adoption process, the Planning and Zoning Commission will be the next body that will hear this. They are appointed by the mayor and affirmed by the city council. The city council and the mayor are the elected officials. They will be the final body that hears this. The public hearing that is likely to be in February will be before the elected officials of the city, and they will be the ones that make the ultimate decision. So, and yes, they have all public comment that we've received via email or that they've heard verbally. We have provided that to them through the steering committee so far, and as we continue to receive that, we will continue to provide that input to them.
And the one thing I will add is that's what the white card's for comments. And so as you're thinking about any comments you might have that you want part of that record and part of this process going forward, it'll be great for you to tell us afterwards, on the one-on-one if that's what you want to do. But to make it officially part of the record, you need to fill out that white card and leave it here, perhaps on the podium or on the tables here, and we'll make sure that they get collected, scanned in, and forwarded with the recommended code.
Next question was one that was something that we didn't describe or talk about because it's something that's not changing the code. So it was asked about how are you addressing the many ways in which the front yard setbacks are determined. The current code for residential is that we average the front yards of adjacent structures or down the street. So there's no proposal to change that. And the general idea of that is in residential districts, you want to have some general conformity or general compatibility and similarity between those setbacks. But because the city has developed over years and over time, just setting a number at 35 or 40 feet for the districts isn't going to provide that. So that averaging has been in the code for a very long time. It's not something that we've seen issues with it, although it can get complicated in calculating it sometimes. But so that is proposed to still remain. Let's see. One question was about FAR, and it was why can't the Architectural Review Board control bulk versus changing the FAR? So part of the presentation is actually we've added architectural standards to encourage design practices that would help the appearance of bulk. However, if you remember, Architectural Review Board is not binding on single-family residential. So that's one big reason why they can't control bulk through their regulations. They can certainly encourage it, but they can't control it. So changing the FAR is the way that we can do that. And leading right into a question about half story. I'm just going to keep going, guys. But if you want, but if you have something, jump in.
Can we interject? And then also to build on that, the other thing, regardless of whether it's single family or not, is that the architectural review guidelines are are guidelines, and as Ann pointed out, they are, preferred and discouraged rather than being standards that says you either meet it or you don't. And so the Planning and Zoning Commission and the City Council are reviewing, and staff are reviewing the standards that are more, set in stone, which is what the FAR is in the zoning.
The next grouping of questions was about the half-story changes. So similar to FAR again, but I don't understand why FAR is being changed to include half stories. I thought the idea was to encourage building up rather than out. And similarly, are the FAR requirements being driven by concerns over massing or square footage? If you're looking at mitigating the visual impact of two-story homes, the architectural guidelines, it seems contradictory to penalizing. So we talked about a little bit about why we can't do it just through architectural guidelines. And as far as including half stories in FAR, it was, when FAR was put into place, it was a deduction provided to encourage half stories with the thought that it would provide visual less bulk and have more compatible appearance. However, the feedback that was received throughout this was that really the regulation, regardless of whether it's in a roof area or not, those areas still have a ceiling height of 5 feet or more, or a full ceiling. So regardless of whether it's in the roof area or not, the bulk is still there. And so really, through our evaluation and discussions with the steering committee, those fine-tuning the definition of floor area ratio was the way in which we really decided to take the comments that we received from the public over the past many years about the concern in the size of houses, and to consider these, because it's still floor area, to consider them as floor area. So there was a grouping on side setbacks. So with the new setbacks, has any consideration been given to emergency vehicles getting through, or even lawn care equipment, et cetera? And a similar one asked about the fire department weighing in. So yes, so none of the setbacks proposed are smaller. The side yard setbacks are smaller than already exist, essentially. So R4, we already have areas that are 5 feet and have encroachment into it. And so we're actually clearing the new provisions, clear that 5-foot area or 8-foot area in the R3 district, and make sure that those have no ground encroachments. So these are improving that situation as far as access and emergency services, or for maintenance, lawn care, anything like that. What do you say to residents on smaller lots who existing homes you will devalue by making side setbacks more restrictive than what is currently allowed? So this is one of the big kind of zoning questions. So all zoning regulations affect personal property, right? That's why these are important topics, and we take serious time to consider these. So when zoning changes are made across the board on a citywide scale like this, these are considerations that have to be made and are weighed. However, they're applied equally to everyone within that district, and they're pursued with the intent of addressing issues that the community sees through development. So while some of these things may have an effect on property values one way or the other in opinions, it's really it's important that the recommendations stay focused on the built environment, what the desires are the community in the built environment, and to stay focused on that. So see. Next was about the height of what we call the first floor finish height. Let's see, some of the new construction homes are elevated, and you can see large basement windows. This seems to be adding to the runoff to neighboring properties. How is this being addressed? The current neighboring houses are the same level, adding increased elevation, new construction. So we currently have a regulation that, like that setback, the front setback requirement requires people to average the finished floor the first finished floor, so where the first floor of a house is, of their adjacent neighbors, and the average of that is where they can build. Now, everyone gets to have at least 2 foot of clearance between the existing grade and their proposed. So this is something that we do have a regulation currently on the books, and we require surveys to certify that those are built to what they were, how they were approved, and that's something that we will continue to do. So again, some of these get really detailed, so if you want to talk more about these questions later, please feel free to come up. So another quick one. So our backyard porch is being counted toward lot utilization coverage, so lot coverage. So anything with a roof is getting included in lot coverage, except for there's a deduction for front yard or for front porches that we talked about is getting slightly reduced, and I forget those exact numbers, from 300 to 200. So anything, so that yes, the rear yard porch wouldn't get included in lot coverage. All right, there were a few others on runoff, and I know that they mentioned it was a new regulation that the city passed outside of the zoning code this past year. So let's see. Won't the detached garages create more impervious area, concrete, and runoff? Let's see. The issue concerned with new homes being too big is the root of the issue due to the neighboring homes being flooded, is the real concern of poor stormwater management and the current infrastructure issues. So I'll just clarify one thing. So as the consultant team mentioned, so the city passed earlier this year infill stormwater regulations that were not in place previously for single family development. And so that was through a whole nother process and had a lot of thought and put into it. But the result of that was that all single-family infill residential projects now get evaluated on the current existing impervious, so sidewalks, driveways, roof areas, compared to what they're proposing. If they breach, and I'm not going to go in, this is another very detailed topic, but if they breach certain thresholds that were set during that, those projects are now required to provide what's called stormwater best management practices, BMPs, so rain gardens, underground detention. So now one clarification that I'll make is it's not going to solve all stormwater problems. The committee that was in charge of that was very aware of that. However, the city felt that this was a good measure and an appropriate measure and a needed measure to help ameliorate the issues that have come about from the infill. So similarly, anything, regardless of the lot coverage, floor area ratio, having to build a longer driveway to get to a detached garage, all of that is captured under the new stormwater regulations. So the idea is that those will all be offset to some extent to help increase that situation. So that's where I'll leave runoff. Talked about property values a little bit. So there were multiple different categories of questions on B2 height, building height. So the first one is the B2 height did not explain roof included or not, was presented as if all heights were lowered. Please clarify which were lowered and which were raised. If we want to go to that slide, maybe. Am I going the right direction?
Sure.
Okay. All right. So the first easy answer is it's a kind of a footnote down there, but anyway. So the new methodology for mixed-use projects is that all these heights will be to the top of roof. So regardless of a flat roof, a peaked roof, so the 55-foot or 65-foot measurement will be to the top of roof. So then is to clarify what's lowered and what's higher. This is the comparison on the right side for mixed use. So the current is a 60-foot. The core downtown, again, a quarter mile from the train station, the center of downtown, is being reduced from 60 feet to 55 feet. And to go into a little more detail, so right now it's 60 feet. However, we measure to the mean of a sloped roof. So you are actually lowering it now to 55 to the top of the roof. So if you had a 60-foot height to the mean of the roof, the top of the roof could be another 5 to 7 feet roughly above that. So the peak of a roof now, which like Station Plaza across the street, range from 62 feet to 69 feet, which we have across the street. So these regulations would take that down to 55 feet in the core downtown to the top of roof. Similarly, the 65-foot on the outer downtown would be to top of roof as well. So for flat roofs, it's an easier picture, right? Now it's 60 foot to flat roof. You can get 5 extra feet for a flat roof. For a pitched roof, again, currently we measure to the mean of it, and we'll be measuring to the top now. So a building now that would be 60 foot to the mean of a peaked roof could be 65 today. So it could be something similar to buildings we have now. So these are not drastic changes after everything is compared. The other thing I'll point out that wasn't mentioned is the language for mixed-use building height is still subject to approval by the Planning and Zoning Commission and City Council. So they have discretion in comparing the building to surrounding properties and other characteristics. So it's not like a permitted use in saying you are permitted 40 feet, you meet that, you build it. There is some more additional consideration that is granted to the Planning and Zoning Commission and ultimately the City Council. Went over phase 1 and phase 2 again. Why the increased max height of mixed use outside the primary district from 60 to 65? So I think I answered that a little bit. It might be a slight increase in some cases. And again, the overall reasoning, logic behind it, it goes back to where we started with the visions laid out in the long-range plans and trying to help utilize some of the underutilized areas in downtown and to capture more development that's seen around the region that Kirkwood maybe hasn't seen recently. Similarly, there was, let's see. Sorry, give me a second. In B2 zones, why does the proposed code distinguish between phase 1 and phase 2 streets for mixed-use building heights? So the big motivation there was because of the historic structures in the core downtown area in preserving or protecting compatibility with those which are primarily 2 to 3 story, mostly 2-story buildings. So it was really seen as a way to be more protective of those existing buildings, whereas the outer downtown is really more of a currently a suburban style development with large parking lots and setback buildings. So to help now again, as I mentioned, while those are one of the cards mentioned, they do have proximity to residential properties, and so again, with the mixed-use projects, those will all be considerations with the mixed-use site plan process through the Planning and Zoning and City Council review. A question on kind of the opposite side of the coin, I think, is how do you prevent downtown buildings having all the same boring height? And so this is actually some of the motivation originally in looking also at increasing the height slightly. So going back to the downtown master plan, that was actually what was mentioned by that consultant, was that if you have just measurements at 40 feet and 60 feet, it doesn't allow for variety of floor heights and designs like that. So the original idea was to open that up and to provide some flexibility in building design, ceiling height clearances. So the hope is that with the proposed language, it would go a little bit more toward that.
How you doing, Jonathan?
Okay, yeah. Hanging in there. Might need a drink of water. Let's see. I have not read this one yet, so I apologize. So, would city be willing to re-explain the downtown master plan in the context of updated proposed code and proposed phase 1 and 2? Again, I tried to give a brief overview of that, but if you want more information, please come and see me afterward. There were a couple questions about this. So if with a potential of 34 sites identified for development, it's the idea of how will infrastructure needs be financed. Well, this one says specifically street widening and things like that. So in the downtown, looking at infrastructure, so all of the projects are still subject to review by the water department, by Kirkwood Electric, by fire department. And as far as street widening, I mean, the grid system that we have, I think it's an easy explanation that the system that we have as far as street system, we wouldn't expect to widen streets. We have a grid system. We would evaluate traffic impacts, and as projects come in, when it's necessary, we would require traffic analysis to look at that. If there were any improvements that would be required, so we would continue to do that. Similarly, the utilities, if there are upgrades to infrastructure that are specifically driven by individual projects, we will continue to require them to update infrastructure as needed. So I'll leave that at that. So. I know, again, I didn't get to all of them. Some of them were a little more detailed, so I tried to make some generalization and combine some questions here. But I think that's where we'll leave the group questions. And then, like we said, just some reminders. The white cards, if you have written comments, please provide them and put them here in the box, and we will pass those along to the Planning and Zoning Commission and the City Council. From here, we will have, again, we'll update the project website, and all that information will be there. You can email comments at any time to me. I have cards up here, and my information's on the city's website. The Planning and Zoning Commission is scheduled to hear and discuss the recommendations at a meeting on January 8th. That's a public meeting. However, the public comment opportunity will be at the public hearing at the City Council, which is anticipated to be in February. So still plenty of opportunity during this adoption process. Again, I thank you all for coming. And with that, we'll be available here at the front if anybody wants to discuss questions one-on-one. So thank you all.